Welcome to the Patriotic Pulpit. We're talking today about internationalism versus nationalism. And specifically, we want to come to Donald Trump and the opposition that we find against him and the opposition that is found in the mainstream media, whether it be in the world of academia, whether it be in the entire Democratic Party machinery, as well as the neocons, that is, neoconservatives in the Republican Party, and why there is so much opposition to Donald Trump. But the real issue I'm suggesting is internationalism versus nationalism. So let's think about that. And I want to give a backstory before we come to Donald Trump, and a backstory regarding internationalism. So as it is the case with so many of Americans, the trends that go across America, and the trend that brings us to be a global policeman, all of it is not accidental. Now, official admissions regarding these little-known truths are not very frequent if you read mainstream media, but sometimes they do occur. And I'm going to take a journalist and read his comment. His name is Michael Hirsch, who wrote in Newsweek magazine probably 15, 20 years ago. And he, in his screed against nationalists, he gives us a typical anti-isolationism screed, and he calls it death of a founding myth. And here's the comment that Michael Hirsch made. And I want you to listen carefully to it, because this sounds like a conservative such as myself talking, but he really is a liberal, and he's gloating about it, about internationalism. Quote, "While the isolationists tempted millions with the siren's appeal to nativism," he's talking about America first, "the internationalists," that is those who want a global government, internationalists were always hard at work in quiet places making plans for a more perfect global community. In the end, the internationalists have always dominated national policy. Even so, they haven't bragged about their globe building for fear of reawakening the other half of American psyche, our berserker nativism." And he's talking about me and many of you also. "And so they have always done it in the most out-of-the-way places and with little ado." In December, for example, and continuing Hirsch's comment here, in December 1917, The Inquiry, a group of eager reformers who included a young Walter Lippmann, secretly met in New York to draw up Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. In 1941, that is, he's saying that Woodrow Wilson's 14 points here are international in their orientation. Continuing, Hirsch says, quote, "In 1941, FDR concocted the Atlantic Charter in the mist off of Newfoundland. The dense woods of New Hampshire gave birth to the Bretton Woods institutions. That would be the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. That would be 1944. Hirsch goes on, quote, "And a year later, the United Nations came to life at the secluded Georgetown estate of Dumbarton Oaks. So what emerged took us more or less by surprise. We had built a global order without quite realizing it. Bit by bit, era by era, with our usual schizoid approach, alternating engagement and withdrawal, like it or not, and clearly large numbers of Americans still don't. But we Americans are now part of an organic whole with the world that George Washington wanted to keep distant." End of quote. That really is a telling admission, isn't it? He speaks about the liberals, that is socialists, internationalists, have been working generation by generation to bring us into a global government, and they approach and retreat, global order. And now we have it against the advice of George Washington. Plainly, of course, he's speaking about Washington's farewell address. So the story he tells us begins in 1917, and that begins with Woodrow Wilson. So let's go back to Woodrow Wilson. Thomas Woodrow Wilson was born in 1856. Now remember, we're going toward Donald Trump, but we're taking a long roundabout way to get there. Woodrow says that his first memory was Abraham Lincoln had been elected president and war was inevitable. The Wilsons were northern transplants from Ohio who lived in Georgia and South Carolina. His father was a Presbyterian minister. And if you're familiar with the Presbyterian Church and the Presbyterian Church at that time, you know that socialism had infiltrated it heavily. We've talked about that on former programs. Wilson's academic career included Princeton, and he later became governor of New Jersey. He graduated from the Georgia Bar and pursued a PhD from Johns Hopkins University. But Wilson was fascinated by power. According to Jonah Goldberg in his book Liberal Fascism, he says it was the leitmotif of his entire career. He would later argue as president that he was the right hand of God, and to stand against him was to stand against the divine will. While a graduate student, he wrote a sweeping indictment of the constitutional system in America. His criticism of the constitutional system was the fragmentation and the division of power. The Founding Fathers were very clear that that's exactly what we wanted, and they told us why we needed it. That was Wilson's chief criticism. So number one, I want you to notice that Wilson frequently disparaged the Constitution. Corresponding to the rise of the Darwinian evolution in the scientific field and also in biblical studies was the social Darwinist application of it, and that is the rise of state power. The vast majority of progressive intellectuals believe that the increase in state power was akin to the inevitable evolutionary process. He thus became the first president to speak disparagingly of the Constitution. Jonah Goldberg talks about that in his Liberal Fascism, page 86. For example, Wilson attacked the idea of individual rights and natural rights. Quote, "No doubt, a lot of nonsense has been talked about the inalienable rights of the individual, and a great deal of what that was more vague sentiment and pleasing speculation has been put forward as fundamental principle." A lot of nonsense about inalienable rights of the individual. That's exactly what Wilson said. He did not believe in individual rights or natural rights. That's because he did not believe, apparently, that we have been created in the image of God as is engrafted in our Constitution, or rather in the Declaration of Independence. And by the way, when he would quote the Declaration of Independence, he would leave off the phrases that our rights have been engrafted to us or given to us by God. Number two, he wanted the expansion of federal government power. He acknowledged that the history of liberty is the history of the limitation of government power. He said that before the New York Press Club, but 2 years later, Wilson said, quote, "While we are followers of Jefferson, there's one principle of Jefferson's which no longer can obtain in the practical politics of America. You know that it was Jefferson who said the best government is that which does as little governing as possible. But that time has passed," said Wilson. "America is not now and cannot in the future be a place for unrestricted individual enterprise." So he did not believe in individual and natural rights. He believed in the expansion of government power. He believed, number three, in the evolving Constitution. That sounds like the liberals today, the people who don't believe that there's a constitutional framework that we need to follow. Wilson's writings are chock full with demands that the artificial barriers established in our antiquated 18th century system of checks and balances be smashed. These checks and balances have proven mischievous just to the extent to which they have succeeded in establishing themselves as realities. End of quote. In 1912, for example, on the campaign trail, Wilson explained, quote, "Living political constitutions must be Darwinian in structure and practice. Society is a living organism and must obey the laws of life. It must develop." End of quote. So what did he say? He wanted a living political constitution. He wanted us to view the Constitution as a living document. That means simply that it changes over time. the same thing they were teaching in biblical studies, that the text itself changes and transforms as it comes down through the channels of time. So the Constitution actually changes, literally changes the meaning as it comes to a new generation. That's what Wilson believed. The Constitution means that whatever the reigning interpreters of evolution says it means. And that's exactly, ladies and gentlemen, where we are today as the Supreme Court looks at such things as the 14th Amendment and tells us, well, here we have people who are naturally born in the United States and they're citizens, and they want to apply that to people who are breaking the laws of the country, coming in here illegally and having children. No, that 14th Amendment was written for ex-slaves born here on the soil of the United States. But the changing Constitution idea says, well, we'll apply that to illegal aliens. Then we have, regarding Woodrow Wilson, Colonel Edward Mandell House. House was a Democrat from Texas. He was first attracted to Wilson, interestingly enough, after he won the governorship of New Jersey in 1910 on a progressive platform. Progressive, of course, being the slighter word for socialistic. House was an extremely successful, fabulously wealthy man behind the scenes. House, after he met Wilson and saw that he and Wilson were in perfect agreement, wrote to his brother-in-law and he made this statement. It is just such a chance as I have always wanted, but never before have found both the man and the opportunity. End of quote. Man and the opportunity. I've been looking for the man and the opportunity, wrote House. What opportunity was it that he was looking for? Opportunity to do what? During the winter of 1912, or 1911 through 1912, House told us what the opportunity that he was looking for was. He put his vision on paper in an anonymously printed book called Philip Drew, Administrator. It was a political manifesto disguised as a novel. As described in Philip Drew, the agenda included, number one, this is what House wanted. Number one, socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx. Number two, replacement of an obsolete and grotesque United States Constitution. Number three, graduated income taxes and inheritance taxes. Excuse me. Number four, a new banking law with flexible currency. That would be, of course, the Federal Reserve. Number five, Social Security. Number six, submissions of all nations to an international organization. At that time, he was going to call it the League of Nations. Rose Martin, the noted historian in Fabian Freeway, made this statement. Quote, House was one of the first Americans to foresee the possibilities of evading constitutional safeguards by executive decree. So with that, he also said that and pushed Wilson to have, number one, the adoption of the 16th Amendment, the income tax. Number two, the 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators. That would be, of course, fulfilling his role to circumvent the United States, the grotesque and obsolete Constitution. Number three, the creation of a Federal Reserve. All three of them, are what he put in his book, Philip Drew, Administrator, and all three of these are what Wilson accomplished in his first year as president in office. The income tax, 16th Amendment, direct income tax, and that would be a graduated income tax. 17th Amendment, that is circumventing the obsolete and grotesque Constitution by the direct election of senators. And number three, the creation of the Federal Reserve, that would be put the banking all in hands with flexible currency in the hands of private bankers instead of, as the Constitution mandated, that money should be coined, and that would be under the auspices of the federal government or the Congress itself. Then we have Wilson's fascist police state. This is also an interesting backstory because he got us into World War I. At the outset of World War I, Americans were overwhelmingly opposed to the United States intervention. And Wilson soothingly told Americans we would stay out. History is going to replay itself again with FDR when he promised we would stay out of World War II. All the time, he was manipulating us to get into World War II. This is history that is not told very frequently. Wilson soothingly told Americans we would stay out of World War I, all the while hoping to get involved. Historian George Sylvester Viereck describes Wilson and House's duplicitous doings. Quote, 10 months before the election that returned Wilson to the White House in 1916, quote, because he kept us out of the war, Colonel House negotiated a secret agreement with England and France on behalf of the United States to intervene on behalf of the Allies. On March 9th, 1916, Woodrow Wilson formally sanctioned the undertaking. In other words, Wilson was manipulating to get into the war before his election, in which he was elected on the promise that he would keep us out of the war, all the while scheming behind the scenes. He created the War Industries Board, chaired by Bernard Baruch. The Progressive had no illusions about what they were up to. This is a quote from Grover Clarkson, a member and historian of the War Industries Board. Listen carefully to what he says. It was an industrial dictatorship without parallel, a dictatorship by force of necessity and common consent, which step by step at last encompassed the nation and united it into a coordinated and mobile whole. The point simply is that Wilson was manipulating socialistic-style America not only into the war, but into a big government. Then we have the Committee on Public Information, which is a propaganda arm headed by George Creel, in which they actually arrested people who were opposed to getting us into the war, who would speak out publicly about it. Anyone who refused to back the president was counted as a traitor. Then he had the Sedition Act, the Espionage Act of 1917, the Sedition Act of May 1918, the American Protective League, the APL. All of these things, Woodrow Wilson was creating a fascist state. So the years of subversion in Wilson's period of time included, particularly, remember, the 16th Amendment, the income tax, the direct election of senators, the 17th Amendment, skirting the Constitution, and then the creation of the Federal Reserve. Now, just for review's sake, think about the income tax. T. Coleman Andrews served as commissioner for the IRS for nearly 3 years in the 1950s. He resigned and he made this statement. The income tax is fulfilling the Marxist prophecy that the surest way to destroy a capitalist society is by steeply graduated taxes on income and heavy levies upon the estates of people when they die. And this is exactly what Wilson had in mind. I want you to listen to Ben Bernanke, who was the Federal Reserve chairman in 2002. Not long after he was appointed to the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors, he made this in a prepared speech, and he was at the time giving honors to Laureate Milton Friedman. And I want you to hear what he had to say regarding the Federal Reserve and its role in what took place in the 1920s, which we know as the Great Depression. This is Ben Bernanke, quote, "Let me end my talk by abusing slightly my status as an official representative of the Federal Reserve System. I would like to say to Milton and Anna Schwarz, regarding the Great Depression, you're right. We, that is the Fed, we did it. We're very sorry, but thanks to you, we won't do it again." End of quote. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll never hear that in a high school classroom. You'll never hear that in a collegiate classroom, because the common parlance is, and the common stock information is, that it was created simply because of the free market system somehow got out of control and was all wacky. But that is absolutely false. That is the boldest lie that is told. Many Americans believe today that the free market caused the Great Depression. Ben Bernanke sets that to rest. He tells us, no, it was the Fed itself, and he was one who knew. Now back to Wilson for just a moment. Wilson created or wanted to create and had created in embryo form a world government called the League of Nations. It was his pet project. And part of the story is this, that his right-hand man, his shadow, Edward Mandell House, told Wilson, he said, I want you to just get it done slightly, just get the act done in Congress. And when you get it done, we can build on it later. We can make it what it needs to be. But Wilson, like so many professors are today in colleges, prima donnas, they don't want anyone to cross them. He did not like that several senators were crossing him, worried about a global government, a world government in embryo form, that we are giving away our sovereignty. And so he met them head on, clashed with him, and Edward Mandell House told him, stop it, because we want to get simply our foot in the door, get it done, get us involved in the League of Nations, and then we can build on it later. But Wilson would have none of that. He wanted it all or nothing right now. And you know what happened? We did not agree to the League of Nations. That would be in 1918 and following. And the points that Wilson had put forth, and they wanted it in embryo form, but the congressmen backed out of it. They didn't want it. So Edward Mandell House withdrew himself. They had a split with Woodrow Wilson. And he created two organizations in order to foster the concept of world global government. Number one institution was the Royal Institute of International Affairs in England. It was a globalist coterie of these globalists, internationalists who wanted to be a part of a global government. The second organization was called the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, which still controls much of the politics in America. They transferred, and they wanted the transfer of money and jobs from America to foreign nations, so they created, as we talked about at the beginning, Michael Hirsch in the Newsweek article talked about the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. They were created to siphon money away from America and send it overseas. What is that? It is socialism. That's all that it is. Siphon money from the United States taxpayer and send it overseas. And then that was not fast enough, so John F. Kennedy sponsored or helped sponsor, pushed or backed what was created in Congress, USAID, USAID. And we hear a lot about that today. But that still was not enough. In order to get us into a global government, we have to transfer not only the wealth, but the jobs of America. And so the North American Free Trade Agreement passed during Bill Clinton's time, and we hemorrhaged one half of the United States manufacturing jobs away in 1 year. Why did that occur? It occurred because that which has been controlling the government policies since the time of Woodrow Wilson is internationalism, socialism, international socialism. And the internationalists include the entire Democratic Party, including such heavyweights in the past, such as FDR, LBJ, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and all the Democratic Party today. And Republicans, such as the neocons, such as George Bush Sr., George Bush Jr., Richard Nixon, and many other Republicans. But do you know who has not been an internationalist? Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a nationalist, that is, America first. But you can't even say nationalist today because people think immediately, oh, that sounds like Adolf Hitler. No, Adolf Hitler was a socialist. Adolf Hitler was a socialist. He had the Socialist Party in Germany. And simply because he had Nazi Germany in the first place of it, it would be a German-controlled world government under socialism. That's why people say, well, or nationalism sounds like Hitler. No, Hitler was a socialist. He was on the left side of the spectrum. That is one of the misunderstandings in America, misteachings, to say that he was on the right, that Nazism was on the right. Absolutely not. He was a globalist. He was an internationalist. and he was a nationalist first in the sense that he wanted a socialistic government with Germany in control, global government underneath them. That's why now you know why so many people hate Donald Trump, because he is not an internationalist. Now to the tariffs. How did we pay the government before Woodrow Wilson came along? We paid through tariffs, taxing foreign nations for sending their goods in here to protect the American worker. That's why we made a tax on the tariffs. That is the tariff coming in. And that's exactly what Donald Trump wants to go back to. In order to do it, he's going to have to reset the entire table that has been set for you by the globalists, internationalists, socialists from the time of Woodrow Wilson. That's a big task, but I believe Donald Trump is the man to do it. That's why I support the tariffs on foreign countries and the tariffs to get us out of this socialistic Marxist idea of an income tax.